Welcome to your whole class reading session for Monday the 11th of January. Today we're going to have a look at a new text. We're going to get into that in a second, but before we begin I just want to give you a quick reminder about reading. The daily reading reminder is that in school we expect you to be reading at least 15 minutes every single day, and the expectation at home should be exactly the same. So we would like you to make sure over the course of this half term that you are spending 15 minutes reading anything of your choice. So that can be a book, a fiction story, it can be the sports news if that's what you're interested in, or it can be a information book, a non-fiction text, anything that you are interested in makes you excited to read it. But as long as you are spending 15 minutes every day, just a very, very friendly reminder to you. Today, we are going to start our new text, which is called The Transatlantic Slave Trade. What type of text do you predict this is? What do you already know about this? So I'm just going to give you a moment just to pause and think over those two questions. Okay, let's have a look at the text. There is a copy of this on your Google Classrooms, and you will also have a copy in the handout of the home learning. But I'm going to go through it now. I would encourage you to read it every single day, but I'm going to go through the slides with you now. I am going to read through it with you this one time, but again, as we revisit our learning every day, I would like you just to go back and reread the text before answering any questions. So let's have a look at the text together. It's called The Transatlantic Slave Trade. From the late 16th until the early 19th century, Europeans were responsible for the enslavement of millions of people from parts of West Africa, transporting them across the Atlantic Ocean in the most awful of conditions to be inhumanely sold into a life of hard, unpaid labour and brutality in the Americas. This was known as the transatlantic slave trade, a bleak and shameful period in history to which the deaths of millions of Africans can be attributed. Underneath that, we've got a picture of the triangular trade, and you can see there's a picture of the United Kingdom in the top right-hand corner, and you can see there's a dotted line that's going down the page heading towards Africa. And then there's a red dotted line coming from Africa moving over to the Americas. And then there's another green dotted line that is heading back towards the United Kingdom. We'll have a look at what those things mean in a second. The triangular trade is the name used to describe the three stages of the transatlantic slave trade. Its most prolific period was between 1740 and 1810, with estimates of around 60,000 people being enslaved each year. Initially, vast ships travelled to the West African coast, carrying goods such as cloth, guns, and ironware. Upon arrival, these goods would be bartered for men, women, and children who had been forcibly removed from their villages. For the notorious Middle Passage across the ocean, these people endured unsanitary conditions below deck. Overcrowded and filthy ships spent months at sea, and many people died as a result. When the ships arrived in the West Indies, their weakened passengers were sold at auction to the highest bidder. Thus, African people were bought and sold as possessions and became enslaved people, forced to work mercilessly on plantations with little chance of payment or freedom. The third stage of trade involves the ships returning to Europe with goods grown by the enslaved African villages. These goods included sugar, coffee, cotton, and tobacco, were then sold to the people of Britain and beyond, completing the triangle which was built on the exploitation of many people. The process would then begin again. What happened to the African villagers on the Middle Passage? After they'd been taken from their homes inland, the villagers were forced onto huge ships at a coast, many having never seen the sea before. Ships often carried over 700 people at a time. They were chained together in cramped conditions because they were considered cargo by the ship's captains. Below deck, the air was stifling and pungent, and conditions were unsanitary. Many people grew ill. If they survived the Middle Passage, once sold into slavery, life did not improve. Slave owners sought to crush the enslaved people's spirits and control them. They were given a new name, made to learn a new language, and forced to adopt new customs. Daily life on the plantation involved working 14 hours or more a day, with harsh beatings for any transgressions. However, despite the brutal consequences, many of the enslaved people did bravely resist, and some were even able to earn their freedom and join the fight for the abolition of slavery. Please forgive my pronunciation on this one. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce this person's name, but I'm going to give it a go. This is Olaudah Equiano's story. Olaudah Equiano, who lived between 1745 and 1797, was enslaved in West Africa, in modern-day Nigeria, as a child, but was fortunate enough to survive and then to pay for his freedom. He became an abolitionist and travelled to Europe to share his life story and promote his autobiography. The interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano was published in 1789. Due to the fact it recounted his own traumatic experience of slavery, it became a powerful, persuasive argument for its abolition. Did you know that Olaudah Equiano raised awareness of slavery by lecturing in Birmingham, Nottingham, Manchester, Sheffield, and Cambridge? Abolition at long last. Eventually, British citizens began to recognise that slavery was unethical. In 1807, the House of Parliament outlawed the slave trade itself. However, it was not until 1833 that enslaved people began their freedom across the British Empire. In the USA, there was great resistance to abolition, and slavery continued, partly due to the fact that wealthy plantation owners continued to prosper from slave labour. Disagreements about slavery between Americans led to the American Civil War in 1861 to 1865. Furthermore, the civil rights movement of the 1960s arose due to the continued segregation of black and white Americans over the 100 years following abolition. So here we have a glossary to explain some of the words that are used in the text. Abolitionist. That's someone who campaigns for abolition, the action of abolishing a system. So in this case, slavery. They didn't want it to exist anymore. They wanted to get rid of it. Segregation. That's the enforced separation of different ethnic groups in a country. So in other words, if you belong to one group, you were forcibly told to stay away from another group. And transgression. That's an act that goes against the law, rule, or code of conduct. In other words, it's an offence. So we're going to have a look at some fact retrieval today, and I'd like you to think about which strategies we use when answering fact retrieval questions. Remember to find the key word in the question. You're going to scan the text for the key word, and then you're going to read the text around that key word. So here is your questions for today on your learning intentions sheet. A copy of this is uploaded onto your Google Classrooms page. So I would like you to make sure you are reading the text very carefully if you need to go back and check for anything. There are 4 questions on that page. Some of them are tick box questions. Please read them carefully, because on one of the questions you just tick 1 answer. On the next question you'll tick 2 answers. And then have a look at questions 3 and 4 that follow. Good luck.